Imagine you have this incredible, dynamic pose in your mind. You find a perfect reference, feeling a glimmer of hope that this is the drawing that will change everything. But once you sit down and attempt to draw it, the hopefulness completely drains the second you realize your hands can't keep up with your brain. Since I first started learning how to draw a year ago, I spent months obsessing over eyes, hair, and colors, and got pretty good at drawing portraits. But I was hiding a big secret. I was terrified of everything below the character's waist. So it's been a while since I last tried drawing a full body piece, and I felt a bit ambitious. So I grabbed this reference, tried drawing this pose, and I literally gave up after 10 minutes. Because the moment I finished the sketch, I realized I wasn't ready for this complex pose at all. The proportions were completely off, and the whole body looked like it was being weighed down by a pile of bricks. And the scary part is, I didn't know how to fix it. Therefore, a sinking feeling started creeping up to me. Was my drawings always this stiff? Looking back at my past drawings, I noticed a common trend. My poses always felt extremely awkward, like there was no fluidity or movements in them. They just looked lifeless in a way. And one drawing that really stands out to me is this memorable art of Marin. Honestly, every time I look at it, it feels like she has a toothache with the way her arm is positioned. At the time, I thought the stiffness of my art was because I had no clue on how to draw the body. So I actually spent a couple weeks breaking down the body, studying proportions, to try and make everything look correct piece by piece. Even once I drew this art, which was the best full body illustration I've drawn so far, something still felt off. And that's when I realized I had ignored something that would completely change how I approach art as an artist. Gestures. Gesture drawing was something that's always been in the back of my mind, but I never really took it seriously. In fact, back when I first started drawing, I used to do 1-minute gesture drills as a warm-up. I would get bored really quickly, and eventually just stop doing them altogether. I honestly thought it was just a scribbling exercise, and I didn't understand how a 60-second messy sketch can directly impact my art. As a result, many of my past artworks were either positioned awkwardly or I just avoided drawing the whole body because I couldn't really capture the essence of a pose. I knew something was wrong with my figures based on how these came out, but I just didn't completely understand what exactly. Instead of trying to figure all of this stuff on my own, I got access to Hide's master figure drawing class on Colossal. Since I didn't really have much experience with figures or gestures drawing, my first attempts at some of these drawings were not half bad, they were all bad. One thing I noticed pretty quickly was I am the type to be fixated on a lot of small and intricate details. I would spend way too much time aiming for perfection on a single muscle before moving on to the next step. So when Hide's course began going through these individual anatomy and different body landmarks, I naturally drew along, tried to memorize everything and focus on getting each part right. And that was a pretty big mistake. Throughout the course, one of the main things Hide emphasizes is not to overcomplicate things in the beginning. Instead, focus on simplifying the body down into basic forms and focus on seeing the entire pose as one large mass. He also introduces a really interesting approach to gesture drawing by combining a line of action with proportion guides. And that personally was a game changer for me. You see, to this day, I still struggle with proportions. Whenever I draw a full body art, I usually need to map out my proportions first in order to get proper proportions. Without it, I couldn't draw a full body art at all. And before learning about Hide's technique, I will usually just eyeball everything in my gestures drawings, which is probably why my figure always end up uneven and awkward looking. Another thing I've learned was to start with simplified mannequins first to capture the energy and to get a feel of the pose first. This is where things started to click for me. I realized before this, my approach to drawings, especially poses, was completely wrong. I would draw a line of action, then completely ignore it while I jump straight into drawing proper anatomy, worry about my proportions, and then question my poor decisions when the figure comes out completely deformed. But once I started applying these ideas from Hide, I was able to focus on the flow first. By simplifying the body into a basic mannequin, I began noticing small changes. I wasn't overcomplicating every detail of a body anymore, because my mind shifted to capturing the energy of a pose instead. And once I finished building the simple forms first, it actually became easier to detail them as a finishing touch. Anyways, I drew a lot of poses using the same references that Hide provides, while also finding a few of my own references to apply these techniques on my own. And when you compare the gestures I've drawn before taking Hide's course and after, the difference is definitely night and day. However, even though the poses had more flow, the characters can still feel like they are stuck on a flat 2D surface. So in order to elevate these poses, I had to move past the lines and started thinking more in volumes, which leads us into one of my worst fears, perspective. Drawing in perspective is something I've always tried to avoid, because it just feels really intimidating. My mindset was, I could just skip perspective by using a good reference. So while I do have some experience drawing characters in perspective, it's usually just finding a good reference, so I'm more or less copying everything. But copying isn't the same as building, and this is something Hide goes really deep into. I followed along and started breaking down the body into simple forms that exist in 3D space, and quickly learned the importance of boxes. You see, once I start drawing these boxes as the sketch for the body, it made things feel a lot less overwhelming. To be honest, adding this extra step in my sketching process felt like a chore at first. I do the gesture, build a simple mannequin, and then I had the urge to just start adding details to the art. But I realized this step can actually end up being the biggest time saver in the whole drawing process. By slowing down and building this low poly foundation first, I was able to map out my sketch, making sure everything stayed consistent early. So in case something went wrong, I could catch the mistake and fix it before the drawing completely fell apart in the later stages. If you are someone like me, who's been struggling with stiff figures for the longest time and having trouble understanding perspective, Colossal is kind enough to offer me an exclusive subscriber link to share with you that includes a $45 discount for Hide's course I've showcased, or any course on Colossal you might find interesting. Make sure to take advantage of my unique link in the description and get started today. Now it's finally time to put everything I've learned from Hide to the test. For the final art in this video, I'm gonna draw Marin again, and even though I will be using the same exact reference as before, I decided to challenge myself to exaggerate this pose a bit further. Normally, I would be a bit hesitant to stray too far from my references because I would be constantly worried about my proportions breaking or somehow messing up the structures. But with the techniques I've learned, I'm curious to see if I can overcome this fear. Starting with a gesture, I pushed the action line further than the reference actually showed. In my previous attempt, I basically followed the reference photo to a T, and that's probably why it ended up looking stiff. This time, I'm tilting the hips further, which I think will give this pose more life. Right now, I'm just trying to capture the energy of the pose, not worrying too much about other details, and my simple mannequin came out like this. To make sure this pose stays fluid, I used a combination of straight and curved lines for the limbs to create a more dynamic structure. This gives the limbs a sense of movement and keeps it from looking like blocky parts. Looking at this example visually, if you straighten both sides of the limb, it looks like a pipe. And if you curve both sides, you get a limb that looks like a sausage. Balancing both is how I was able to get that snappy look. With the gestures locked in, paired with a solid foundation underneath, I was able to quickly construct my head, and use these volumes to map out the body, bringing everything together nicely. Since my sketch already have a solid form, it was easy to visualize the shapes and see where the clothes are supposed to sit on top of. Instead of guessing folds or randomly positioning them, I was able to use the line art to wrap the clothes around the body naturally. Everything was going right until I got to the face. Alright, even though this video is about figure drawing, I still wanted Marin to have that expressive smile. But for some reason, I was having a hard time getting her expression to look right. I actually finished the entire grayscale and flat colors before finally admitting to myself that I had to go back and fix this. After a few adjustments and the expression finally matching the pose, I began my rendering process starting with the hair. And because I had a clear light source established in my grayscale, the rendering became a lot simpler. There are some parts in shadow that I noticed could be a bit darker, but I want this piece overall to feel vibrant and lively. And tying everything I've learned so far, she came out like this. A couple weeks ago, after abandoning this sketch, I never thought I'd be able to capture the energy I had in mind with this piece. Before I learned gesture drawing, I was mostly just following a reference to draw my characters. And as a result, most of my drawings come out pretty flat and boring. Because if the reference lacks energy, my art directly reflects it. But Hide's course taught me that the reference is just the starting point. It gave me the ability to diverge a little from the original, to stop drawing a Marin that looks like she needs to see the dentist, and start drawing a Marin that feels alive.